Hello, chess friends. This is Video Master Valeri Lilov, and welcome to today's new series on the pawn structures. What I would like to talk about right now are the new ideas about the backwards pawn. Now, so many players have heard what a backwards pawn is. Some different people have different opinion about the backwards pawn. Mostly, they believe that it's a weakness, and everyone has its own ideas. Of course, the strong masters and the grandmasters know that it's a general weakness that everyone should try to actually avoid, and one should never ignore when he sees actually a backwards pawn in front of the opponent's camp, in front of the enemy's pieces. Nevertheless, exactly what is a white backwards pawn in reality? How can one exploit its weaknesses? Can a backwards pawn be a strength, as very often it happens with the isolated pawn or the hanging pawns? And what can we say about those typical positions that arise very often when one gets a backwards pawn? I'm going to try and give explanation to each one of these answers right now, and also tell to you the most important patterns that you have to recognize for each one of the positions with a backwards pawn for each player. However, in my opinion, my explanations will be enough for you to know exactly how to treat those kind of situations, no matter whether you play with the player who has the backwards pawn or the player who is playing against that. So first of all, I'd like to start with the classical game, an essential example with a game on a backwards pawn and that hack against the backwards pawn that happened between the grandmasters Parma and Benko. Generally, that game is very essential, and in my opinion, it will show what a backwards pawn is and how can that be eventually a weakness. So basically, the game started with the moves of e4, c5, knight f3, and e6, which is the initial position of the Sicilian defense. White played d4, and then black decided to exchange. C takes the d4. Knight takes the d4, and now, of course, a6. The plan with e6 and a6 in the same time is often known as the Paulsen variation. It's the beginning of an essential system that can lead to either the more popular time on a variation that starts with knight to c6, or the other possible line could be the actual Khan variation that starts with queen c7. But the Paulsen ideas with e6 and a6, which were invented by, in fact, Paulsen himself in the end of 19th century, the beginning of 20th century, always relate to the plan of development of this bishop, the dark square bishop, through fc5 or b4, from where it can either influence the center, or, for example, if white decides to develop his own knight to c3, one of the things that black can eventually consider attacking against it. So, truly after moving on with pawn to the a6 in this game, white played bishop to d3. This is one of the most essential plans to develop quickly and castle. And later on, white's idea is simply to remove that knight so that it's not attacked, and utilizes more potential in the center in order to decide and develop his pieces quickly from the king side in order to attack through there. So white castled directly, black played knight c6, and then white did queen to e2. The normal development that white is getting in this position should give him the enough compensation and, of course, direct possibilities around. I suppose that there are opportunities with which white can develop on the king side, and that looks like a very good idea. So white did that kind of a line, and black played the move of d6. The idea behind black's normal development is to keep flexibility between his pieces, especially between the pawn structure and the minor pieces. When he has his bishop on b6 instead of being on the e7 square, that's how he allows the black knight to stand on the e7 and eventually to keep an opportunity to go with g6 and e5, or even after from e7 it can eventually support the f5 square and black can push up with his pawn. Of course, there are other essential ideas like d5 or even e5 sometimes, but let's see what happened in the game itself. White intended to exchange the dark squared bishop and thus made d6 a little bit more vulnerable, in result of which black played knight f6, c4, and here we have an interesting structure. With white's last move of pawn into c4, most importantly, he gets the two pawns on the e4 and c4 in the so-called Maroczy type of formation. This literally prevents black from pushing up with d5 or something similar, so white maintains the control of the square. And on the other hand, white wants to stabilize kind of a grip against black's position, together with moves like knight c3, rook a to d1, and basic ideas that will relate to the attack against the d6 pawn. So pretty much after white played the move of c4 on this position, black played castles on the short side. White did knight b1 to c3, bishop takes e3, and then queen takes e3. After this kind of an exchange, of course, white maintains his strong control out there. And his eventual white's eventual idea is to position his major pieces, his heavy artillery, as I say, on the d file, and take into account moves like rook to g2, rook to d1, maybe even removal of the bishop from d3, with which he can attack against the d6 pawn, which is a backwards pawn. Now, probably some of you ask me now, okay, what is a backwards pawn? Okay, I would like to give now an explanation. In chess, the so-called backwards pawn is usually a pawn that is behind the pawns of the same color. For example, the black pawns right now. And that pawn, cannot be advanced without the loss of material. So, a backwards pawn is a pawn that is behind the pawns of the same color on the adjacent files and cannot be advanced without loss of material or other positional or material damages. So usually the backwards pawn is literally a weakness because it presents a burden in front of one's position. On the position on the board, we see that the black pawn on the d6 square is a backwards one. It is because, as we can say, it cannot be moved forward in d5 without causing some damage. Like if black plays d5, certainly white can make it as a weakness. Maybe he can attack on the knight, and probably he can attack this pawn on the d5 later on. So black is kind of unprepared to do that at this point. And in general, as we say, the backwards pawns are usually a positional disadvantage since they're hard to defend and they limit the activity. Also, the opponent, like white now, can place a piece, let's say like a rook, sometimes usually a knight or a bishop in the hole or on the file in front of the pawn without any risk of a pawn driving it away. The backward pawn also prevents the black rooks and the queen on the h rank from activating the piece placed on the hole. So I would say, in this case, the d6 pawn is definitely a burden. So now let's see how white would like to exploit it. In this kind of a situation, black played b6 and then white played rook after d1. Positioning the rook in front of that line is the most important thing. The long-range pieces always have the chance to maintain the pressure against such a pawn and, of course, keep the pressure for a longer amount of time. That's what white did. And after the move of rook after d1, as white started with, okay, in this position, black played the move of rook b to d8 to b8, bishop to e2, and now queen to e7. That's a normal continuation. Black actually wants to open the road for his rook to get to the d8 and get something working. And nevertheless, white played, in this case, rook to d2. Of course, white understands that the position is reasonably quiet in nature, and he wants to utilize it by purposeful moves, then directing the pieces against the d6 pawn direct. So after rook d2, rook d8, and then rook a to d1, white has everything under command. The queen, the two rooks, and of course the powerful control in the center is definitely under the white command, and everything is superior. So as soon as white played rook a to d1, black decided to come up with rook d7, and then white did f4. Now, of course, by taking the command over the e5 square, white is also limiting any possibility for black to take a chance and unleash his pieces. And of course, after f4, e5 by black, and then f5, white locks up the position concretely. See, what we find right now is that black's pieces are very much boxed in, and that wouldn't be the same if black had any pawn on the c7 or on the e7. I believe that d6 is an essential example of a pawn that cannot move forward, a pawn that cannot be defended by any other pieces behind. Like any other pawns behind. Maybe there could be a lot of pieces behind, but that doesn't matter. It should be a pawn, a critical defender. And the opponent has an open line. So now we evaluate a backwards pawn by three things. First, the pawn that cannot move forward. For some reason, either it will cause material or positional damages in front of one's position. A pawn that cannot have a protection of an own pawn of the next files, and a pawn against which the opponent has an open line. Might be a diagonal or a file right now, but in fact a line is open so that something can be used to attack against it. So when black played h6, opening a square, a little square for his king so that it can go, white simply started with g4. Often I say that when a player has the control of the center, like right now white has the control of the center and pressure against d6, he has this actual ability, which is like more like a bonus feature of his position, to start attacking on some of the flanks. A flank attack, like right now on the king's flank, is often a key advantage and key concept to proceed with our strategy when we have already got the control or pressure in the central area. So literally when white plays now the move of g4, he has everything. A space in the center, control of the king side, and possibilities to maneuver with h4 and g5 so that he can advance and drive away the black important defenders. So black played queen d8, hoping that maybe his defense on the d6 could be enough, but it wasn't. White simply kept supporting. When the bishop comes to the f3 square, white of course has everything under the command. And after bishop f3, b5 was the only chance with which black starts trying to, change something in this position. In reality, if black doesn't do this move, there will be nothing that he can do or nothing that he can make in order to complicate matters. So it's really important to understand this essential principle that often what matters most is the idea to keep the opponent's counterplay away. And when you have a positional advantage or pressure, as more you keep him in the backwards position where he has no counterplay, more and more the opponent will find it more difficult to release himself. Now this d6 pawn really limits any activity, and b5 seems to be the only way to open up. So why did white left that open? Why did he allow this to happen? So basically the idea is that when this move happens of b5, white feels tremendous. Why? The opening of a position should happen only from the player who has the ability to do so. In what meaning? In the meaning that the player who hasn't got, let's say, space or who hasn't got chances, does not have the right to open up if he wants to stay safe for one simple reason, and the reason is that he is not going to have the opportunity to oppose against the opponent's active pieces. So by opening up, black is this kind of opening of the position will favor white. So that's why white left black to open and in search for counter chances. Because he knows that by opening up the position, white's piece will be a lot better prepared, and black will no longer have the opportunity to oppose, against white's tremendous activity. After the exchange, recaptures, and g5, that breakthrough on the king side is just the beginning of it. The flank attack begins, and of course black's pieces seem to be very much away from the defense of the king side area. He tried b4, but that didn't seem to help. Knight d5 now is just essential. The opportunity which white gets with this move is tremendous in case of an exchange, for instance, of that knight. Of course, white's going to get too much of, let's say, an activity, and the pressure created will be really tremendous and very powerful in the same time. So that's probably the only thing that he can have out there. And okay, after moving up with this knight d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d8, knight takes the d8, white has rook takes the d5. The pressure is set. The position of black is very difficult, almost impossible in my opinion to set up in the right way and oppose against white's initiative and the actual activity that he can create, anything that white is ready to do right there. Most of the people here would say, how should white continue? What kind of a variation he should choose? I believe that everything that we are looking for in this position is in front of us already. At that moment, it does not seem possible, neither available for black to stay safe, because he'll be always tight and completely, cramped to the square, to the pawn on the d6, and that seems to be working in a very good way for white in general. So let's take a look and see what has happened. Actually, it seems like right now black is in a really deep trouble. So is there something that he might have as an idea or another kind of a suggestion? Well, at least not that I can see of in this position. Black tried rook b6, but then white just increases the potential. Now, by bringing most of his pieces directly against the d6 pawn, I suppose black is going to be in a terrible structure, and the formation, of course, is definitely quite bad. Now, as soon as that move really comes up, of course, the idea of knight c4 is too dangerous, like to start with. And then after moving up with knight to the a5, knight b7, and rook c1, the control over the c line is certainly helping white to get everything under the command. Attacking the bishop on c8, black's only move to continue with is knight c5. But then after knight c4, white's easiest way is to take on the d6 and win the knight on the c5, and result hanging with one extra pawn. The further continuation of this game is just worth seeing because of the precise realization that white made of his advantage and the excellent play by Grandmaster Bruno Parma. Grandmaster Parma decided to get forward without letting the black pieces to command and get active, and that's one of the best and most essential ways to realize. Never to allow the opponent to get enough activity. When white supports everything right now, the pressure which is maintained against the pawn on e5 remains strong, and after rook c7, bishop b3, king f8, and then rook takes e5, a second one follows. Probably some of you will ask here, why didn't black play f6 so that he can defend the pawn on e5? Well, it's just because white can open a check, and that discovered check is going to help white to collect the black rook from c7. So in result, after king f8, rook takes e5, rook c1 check, and then king f2, the white king comes up, and of course in a couple of more moves after king e3, then rook c5 attacking the bishop, and then rook c2, white supports everything, and he's ready to advance the king so that he can move it forward and direct threats. The bishop d5, then b3, neutralizing the bishop and getting, the opportunity to cut off the black's king way forward, which is very important. In fact, if the black king cannot be involved up, then there will be nothing that he can do to defend. In just the next upcoming few moves, white managed to get his king forward to c5, and of course, after king b6, rook takes c7, and then king takes to c7, the win is simple. We have got an endgame with 2 extra pawns, and same colored bishops, and of course black doesn't seem to be really having the actual capability to stay safe and actually get ready to defend from upcoming moves like king c5 or other type of ideas, king d6 to c5, which will help white to instantly reach the b4 pawn and attack it through there. After king takes to c7, black actually seems to be in a completely lost position. He kept playing with bishop to d3 and some further moves like that, but unfortunately it did not help. Now the white king reaches the important area, and of course the advantage and the all possibilities set are very simple to be utilized. After this kind of upcoming continuation, black decided to play on with there doesn't seem to be that many moves, but after king to d6 and then bishop to b1, now white's idea is very essential. Let's get up with a move like king c5 to attack the b4 pawn. Bishop takes a2, it follows, and then of course white simply collects the pawn on b4. The next few moves that went on, king e7, and then of course white continues with the king c5. The black king approaches, trying to try to oppose against the white king, but it's very late already. White's idea is simply to maintain this actual pawn out there, and after king c5, that's why black resigned. The b pawn seems to be unstoppable. I believe that this example is very essential case and essential type of an example of the power of the pieces attacking a backwards pawn. So my advice to you is, anytime when you are playing with a backwards pawn, try to consider your position as not an easy one, and try most of all to protect it as best as is possible without keeping more pieces around it. Otherwise, your opponent will achieve his task, which is the main task of the player who is attacking the backwards pawn, is to limit the opponent's activity, not to win this pawn, but limit his activity. Limiting the activity helps one player to actually start a flank attack or attack even against a second weakness somewhere around. And of course, that is the successful way to promote strategy against the backwards pawn. So this is about the first lecture of the backwards pawn. In the other next lectures, I'm going to explain you about the other very important patterns concerning the positions of the typical positions with the backwards pawn. I hope they will be useful for your upcoming games and positions that with the backwards pawn that you can mate.